My dad parked the car at the bottom of that glittering high-rise, and my mom was still touching up her lipstick. She smacked her lips together in the visor mirror, then turned to look at me. Mandy, when we see your grandpa, be sweet, okay, say all the nice things. I mumbled and kept scrolling through my phone, not really seeing anything. Truth is, I hadn't seen my grandpa in 3 years. The last time was in a hospital bed. He had an oxygen tube in his nose and his cheeks had caved in like deflated balloons. I stood by the bed not knowing what to say, and finally just managed, "Grandpa, get some rest." He cracked one eye open, looked at me, and closed it again. After that, my parents never took me to visit him again. That stubborn old man, my dad muttered while hunting for a parking spot. Insists on living in some penthouse. 80-something years old, and he wants to climb that high. My mom rolled her eyes. What do you know, that's an $8 million penthouse. I asked around last week. It's worth at least $10 million now. I read up at the building through the window. Prime downtown real estate, all glass and steel, catching the sunset in shades of fiery gold and red. I tried to picture my grandpa living up there, but all I could remember was him in that faded blue jacket, sitting in his old rattan chair reading the newspaper, a cold cup of tea always sitting beside him. In the elevator, my mom was still coaching me. Just sit there quietly and let the adults talk. The important thing is to make your grandpa think we're a devoted family. Understand? I didn't answer. She was wearing a new Chanel jacket. My dad had a brand new belt with the tag still on. They stood in front of the elevator's mirrored walls like two job candidates, nervous and hungry. The doorbell rang 3 times. The woman who opened the door wasn't anyone I knew, maybe 40, wearing an apron, with a warm smile. Mr. Chen's family, right? The old man's been waiting for you. I blinked. Since when did Grandpa have a housekeeper? The living room was bigger than I'd imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows spread the whole city skyline out like a post-gay road. Leather sofas, marbly coffee table, abstract art on the walls that I couldn't make sense of. Grandpa sat in a wheelchair with his back to us, ring out at the view. Dad. My mom's voice went sweet as syrup as she walked over. We came to see you. The wheelchair turned. Grandpa was older than I remembered. His hair was completely white now, but his eyes were just as sharp. He scanned all 3 of us, and then his gaze stopped on me. Mandy's groan. My nose stung. I almost lost it right there. 3 Rs, and all he said was that one sentence, but somehow, all the hurt from those 3 Rs just dissolved. Dinner was takeout. My dad had ordered abalone and sea cucumber, the whole fancy spread. My mom kept piling food onto Grandpa's plate, calling him Dad more times than I'd heard her say it in my whole life. My dad laughed along, talking about how business was tough lately, how I was about to go to college and expenses were piling up, how he'd recently found this amazing retirement community that would be perfect for Grandpa. Grandpa Ba said anything. Just an occasional between bites. Then my dad got to the retirement community party, and Grandpa set his chopsticks down. Just say what you want to say. Get to the point. The table went dead quiet for 3 full seconds. My dad let out an awkward laugh. Dad, I just think it's too much for you to live alone in such a big place. A buddy of mine runs this high-end senior living facility, great environment, professional CARE, lots of other old folks to play cards and chess with. You want me to move out? Grandpa's voice was flat. No, just somewhere more suitable. My mom jumped in fast. This place is too big for one person. All the cleaning and upkeep. And besides, Mandy's about to start college, we want to give her a better environment too, and there it was. They wanted Grandpa out. So they could sell this place. Or, I looked at my mom's gleaming eyes, moving themselves. Grandpa looked at me. It was a long look. So long I thought he was about to explode, to slam the table the way he used to when my dad was young and stupid. But he just turned his head slowly, looking past us at the darkening sky outside the window. Fine, he said. I'll move. My mom almost couldn't hide her smile. She ducked her head and took a sip of soup. But the appartement doesn't go to you. I looked up. Grandpa wheeled himself over to the side table, opened a drawer, and pulled out a manila envelope. He laid it on the marbly tabletop. This is the deed, he said. And I've already made my will. This penthouse goes to Mandy. My dad's chopsticks clattered onto the table. Dad. My mom's voice went shrill. What are you talking about? Mandy's only 18. She doesn't know anything about property. She doesn't know, Grandpa said, looking straight at her. But you do. You know exactly how to sell this place and use the money to plug the black holes in your husband's business. My dad's face went crimson. That's not, you lost how much gambling last month? Grandpa's voice was quiet but cutting. You think I don't know? My mom stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. Dad, how can you talk to us like that? We came all this way out of kindness. Kindness. Grandpa pushed the envelope toward me. Mandy. Take it. I didn't move. All that abalone and sea cucumber was churning in my stomach. I couldn't breathe. Take it, he said again. Your grandmother and I lived in this apartment for 40 years. Now it's yours. Nobody takes it from you. My mom lunged around the table, grabbed the envelope, and tore it open. She pulled out the papers inside, then she froze. This isn't the deed. Grandpa smiled. It was the first time I'd seen him smile in 3 years. It was a small smile, light, but underneath it was something I'd never seen in his eyes before, something almost playful, like a little kid. The deed's in a bank safety deposit box, he said. That's a trust document. I've already retained a lawyer. Until Mandy turns 25, nobody can touch this property. Including her. My mom's face went pale. My dad finally stood up. Dad, are you trying to say you don't trust us? Who am I trying to protect against? Grandpa wheeled himself toward the bedroom. You tell me. He paused at the door and looked back at me over his shoulder. Mandy. Stay a minute. I have something to say to you. The bedroom door clicked shut. Through it, I heard my mom throw something against the wall, a sharp, brittle crash, like a glass shattering. Grandpa sat on the edge of his bed and pulled an old tin box out from under his pillow. He opened it. Inside was a faded photograph, him and my grandmother when they were young, standing in front of a tiny little house, both grinning like idiots. Your grandmother's last words to me, he said, running his finger over her face in the photo, were that houses don't matter. People do. He handed me the tin box. I know what your parents are like. I can't change them anymore. But I can still protect you. I looked down at that photograph, and the TRS finally came. Grandpa, don't cry, he said. Take this. And remember what your grandmother said. No matter what comes. I clutched that tin box, the edges digging into my palms. Outside, I could hear my mom's sharp voice rising, my dad's low murmurs trying to calm her. The elevator chimed once. Then again. Then the doors slid shut. They were gone. Grandpa leaned back against his headboard and closed his eyes. The city lights flickered on outside the window, casting shifting shadows across his face. I sat by his bed until the housekeeper came in with his evening medicine. That night, I didn't go home with my parents. I lay on that leather sofa in the living room, staring up at the crystal chandelier, pulling things out of that tin box one by one, grandmother's hairbrush. Grandpa's old work ID. A mariage certificate folded into neat SQA res. And a letter. The letter was in grandmother's handwriting, dated a week before she died. The strokes were shaky, but every word was clear. Old man, I don't see who you give the apartment to. But remember, Mandy's a good girl. Don't let her turn out like her parents. I folded the letter back up and put it in the box. The living room was huge and empty, and the neon lights outside flashed and blinked all night. I held that tin box against my chest and closed my eyes. Tomorrow was going to be another fight. I knew my mom wouldn't let this go. But at least for tonight, this apartment was safe. And so was I. The next morning, my phone woke me up. My mom's name flashed across the screen. I read at it for 5 full seconds before I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I ignored it again. By the seventh ring, I finally swiped to answer, and before I could even get out a hello, her voice came at me like a freight train. Mandy-chan, you come home right now. Do you have any idea your father didn't sleep a wink last night? Your grandfather's lost his mind and you've lost yours right along with him? Do you even know what a trust is? You're 18 years old? You can't even manage a bank account. What makes you think you can handle a whole appartment? I held the phone away from my ear. When she finally paused to take a breath, I said, Mom, Grandpa's not well. I'm staying here a few days to help take care of him. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then my mom's voice went soft, so soft it made my skin prickle. Soft like cotton candy soaked in water. Mandy, sweetie, listen to me. That trust your grandpa set up, you can sign to dissolve it. It's that simple. Your father's company has a cash flow problem right now. We just need to borrow against the appartment for a little while. Once things turn around, we'll put it right back. No. I said it quietly. But I meant it. She paused. What did you say? I said no. I sat up on the sofa, my bare feet cold against the marble floor. Grandpa said nobody touches this property until I'm 25. I'm not signing anything. Mandy-chan, I am your mother. I know you're my mother. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the city sprawling beneath me, so vast and so small all at once. But the appartment is Grandpa's. It's his to give to whoever he wants. She hung up on me. I stood there at the window, staring at my own reflection in the glass. Hair a mess. Eyes red-rimmed. But my mouth was set in a hard line I didn't recognize. I wasn't sure where I'd found the courage to say those things. Maybe it was the letter I'd found in that tin box. Maybe it was finally understanding the look in Grandpa's eyes 3 years ago, when he'd lain in that hospital bed with tubes in his nose and watched me stand there saying nothing. That look hadn't been exhaustion, that had been disappointment. In my parents. And in me. Mandy. I spun around. Mrs. Wang, the housekeeper, was standing at the living room entrance with a breakfast tray. Her face was worried. Are you all right? The phone was a little loud. I'm fine. I walked over and took the tray from her. Mrs. Wang, is Grandpa awake? He's up. Sitting on the balcony, having his tea. Grandpa was in his wheelchair with a blanket over his lap, a steaming cup of tea in his hands. The morning sun painted everything gold, his white hair, the rim of his cup, the faint dust motes floating in the air. He saw me coming with the tray and smiled a little. Your mother. Yeah. Gave you an earful? Yeah. You'll get used to it. He took the bowl of congee I handed him. She's always been like that. Wants something, she wants it now. Doesn't get it, she makes a scene. It was the first time I'd ever heard Grandpa talk about my mom. Back home, my parents never mentioned his side of the family. Whenever I asked my dad, he'd just say, your grandfather's got a difficult personality. He doesn't like to socialize. Now I was rooting to think the difficult personality was on the other side of the equation. Grandpa, I said, pulling a stool up next to him. Why did you give the appartment to me? He took a slow sip of his congee and chewed thoughtfully. Down below, rush hour traffic was bumper to bumper, horns blaring. He looked at all that chaos and then at me. Because you remind me of your grandmother, he said. She was the same way when she was young. Never listened to anybody. Always followed her own compass. But I don't know anything about real estate or trusts, or knowing things isn't the point. He set his bowl down and turned to face me. The point is, you have a scale inside you that's balanced. Your parents have scales too, but there's a crooked. Everything they put on them slides to one side. I stirred my congee without eating. There was something I'd been holding in my throat for a while, and I finally worked up the nerve to ask. Grandpa, why did you keep me away for 3 years? He was quiet for a long moment. Because I didn't want you to see me lying in that bed. He touched his own leg through the blanket. 3 years ago, I had a stroke. Your mother's first question was whether I'd written a will. Your father was shouting in the hospital hallway about how when he dies, that APA meant ours. I heard every word through the door. My chest tightened like someone had reached inside and squeezed. I didn't want you to see any of that, Grandpa said quietly. You were still young then. I was afraid it would put you in an impossible position. And I was afraid, he stopped out afraid of what afraid you'd become like them. The wind picked up and lifted the corner of his blanket. I reached over and tucked it back around his knees. My fingers brushed his hand, dry and papery and sealed. I won't, I said. He smiled and didn't answer. That morning, I helped Mrs. Wang with Grandpa's sponge bath, his clothes change, his medicine. I'd never done any of it before. I was clumsy, spilled water on the sheets at least 3 times, but Grandpa never rushed me. He just pointed and directed when I got lost. Around noon, my dad showed up. He didn't call first. He just rang the doorbell. When Mrs. Wang opened the door, I saw him standing there in the same new shirt from yesterday, the price tag still dangling from the collar. Mandy. The way he said my name was strange. There was a tiredness in his voice I'd never heard before. He walked into the living room, didn't throw a fit the way my mom had, just sat down on the sofa and read at the floor for a long time. Your mother told me what happened. I stood across from him, not sure whether to sit or stay standing. She said you refused to sign. Dad, I took a breath. This is Grandpa's APA. It meant, I know it's Grandpa's. He looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot. But your mother and I have been married 20 years. I never asked her for a single thing. Your grandfather's never liked me, and I made my peace with that. But your mother's been through a lot these past few years, following me around. Then you should EARN it yourself instead of eyeing Grandpa's place. The words came out before I could stop them, and they surprised me as much as him. My dad read at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You're right, he said finally, standing up. He walked over and put his hand on my shoulder. You're right. Then he left. I stood in the middle of that huge living room, watching his back disappear through the door. Something about today felt off. He was too quiet. Too calm. Quiet and calm weren't my father's usual settings. That afternoon, I snuck off to the balcony and texted my best friend Sophie. I gave her the short version of everything that had happened over the past 24 hours. She replied with a string of exclamation points, then called me immediately. Mandy-chan, you are insane. You talked to your mother like that. I didn't have a choice. I huddled in the corner of the balcony, keeping my voice low. She wants to sell Grandpa's place to pay off Dad's debts. But your grandpa's no slouch either, a trust that's serious. Sophie whistled on the other end. Seriously though, your mom's not going to let this go. You know her. I knew her better than anyone. When my mom wanted something, she didn't stop until she got it. When I was little, she sat outside the principal's office for a whole day to get me into that private elementary school. When my dad's company needed a contract, she went door to door with gift baskets and a smile. She never lost. Except this time, Grandpa was standing in her way. BCA refill, okay. Sophie's voice dropped. Don't go anywhere alone. Your mom's the type, she'll do whatever it takes. She's not going to kidnap me. There was a pause on the other end. You never know. I hung up and walked back inside just in time to see Mrs. Wang coming out of Grandpa's bedroom. She was holding a pill bottle, and her face looked pinched out. What's wrong? Your grandfather's blood pressure meds are almost out, she said, frowning. A new shipment was supposed to come today, but I never got it. Should I run to the pharmacy? No. I called already. They said the shipping address was wrong, so they sent it back. She sighed. I don't understand. It's the same pharmacy that's always filled it. Never had a problem before. Something cold slithered down my spine. Who set up the shipping address? I think Mrs. Wang hesitated. I think your mother handled it. I stood there in the hallway feeling like I'd just been doused with ice water. From the top of my head all the way down to my toes. My mom messed with Grandpa's medication. That night, I slept. The chandelier was off, leaving only the dim neon glow from outside. I hugged that tin box to my chest, running my thumb over the edge of grandmother's photograph. Grandpa's medicine would run out the day after tomorrow. Mrs. Wang said a new order would take at least 3 days to arrive. I couldn't wait 3 days. I pulled out my phone and typed into the CRCHBR, trust revocation conditions. I scrolled through page after page of legal jargon that made my head spin. Finally I texted Sophie, "Do you know any lawyers?" "Like, good ones," she replied instantly. "What are you planning?" "I want to get my mom off the medication authorization list." I hit send and STA read at those words. Something in me had shifted. For years, I'd been the obedient one. The one who did what my parents said, studied what they wanted, went where they pointed. But over these past 2 days, I'd STA root to wake up to. I wasn't that girl anymore, the one who stood by a hospital bed with nothing to say. I put the tin box back under my pillow and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I was going to find a lawyer. The next morning, I told Grandpa I had to go out. He didn't ask where. He just said BCA refill and went back to his newspaper. I had a feeling he knew everything anyway. This 80-something-year-old man saw straight through people, he just didn't bother calling them out anymore. Sophie had set me up with her cousin. His name was Ryan, and he just passed the BAR exam not long ago. He worked at a small firm downtown. Sophie said he was reliable but didn't talk much. Perfect for what I needed. Ryan's office was on the 15th floor of a nondescript building. The elevator was packed with suits and ties, and there I was in my hoodie and jeans and canvas backpack, looking like I'd wandered onto the wrong movie set. He was waiting for me in his tiny corner office. He wasn't much older than me, late 20s maybe, with black-rimmed glasses and stacks of files piled everywhere. A cup of coffee sat at his elbow, still steaming. "Sophie told me your situation," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "You have the trust documents." I pulled the manila envelope out of my bag and handed it over. Ryan opened it and read slowly, page by page. I didn't rush him. I leaned back in my chair and STA read at the law posters on his wall without reading a single word. About 10 minutes later, he looked up and took off his glasses. "Your grandpa hired a good lawyer," he said. "This trust has an irrevocable clause, a 5-tier guardian structure, and a third PA Rudy custodian designated. In plain English, unless your grandpa himself signs off along with the legal guardian, this property can't be touched until you turn 25. Even then, the custodian has veto power." Legal guardian, that's my parents, right? Yes, but it doesn't matter. Ryan pointed at one of the pages. The clause here explicitly separates property rights from guardianship. Meaning even if your parents sign, without the custodian's confirmation, it's a dead document. I let out a long breath. However, Ryan flipped to the last page and frowned. "What's this medication authorization addendum?" I leaned forward. It was a separate attachment, stamped with Grandpa's personal seal and a pharmacy's official chop. The document authorized a named individual to receive and manage Grandpa's recurring prescription deliveries. "The authorized person listed here," Ryan turned the paper around to show me, "is your mother." My stomach dropped. "If this authorized Pa Rudy interferes with the medication supply chain," Ryan continued, "it could theoretically affect the elderly individual's regular treatment. Of course, we'd need evidence." I told him everything, Mrs. Wang's call about the wrong shipping address, the cancelled order, the 3-day delay. Ryan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he wrote a number on a sticky note and slid it across the desk. "This is a community lawyer I know. He specializes in elder rights cases. If you think your mother is actively interfering, I'd reach out to him." I took the note and tucked it into my pocket. I stood up to leave, but Ryan called me back. "One more thing, Mandy. I turned. Your grandpa set up this complicated trust structure to protect you. That means his lawyer anticipated a lot of scenarios. He pushed his glasses up. Which means he probably anticipated this one too." What did that mean? I walked out of that office turning his words over in my head. Anticipated what? That my mom would mess with the medication, that my dad would show up and try to guilt me, or my phone buzzed. Mrs. Wang. Her voice came through shaky and rushed. Mandy, hurry back. Your mother's here. She's in the living room with your grandfather, and it's getting ugly. I flagged down a cab and spent the whole ride telling the driver to go faster. My phone kept vibrating in my hand, Sophie sending a dozen frantic messages that I didn't have time to read. The elevator doors opened. I could hear my mom before I even got to the door. Her voice was high and sharp, cutting through the hallway like a knife on glass. Dad! What exactly do you want from us? Mandy is 18 years old. She doesn't know anything about investments. This appointment is wasted on her. Do you have any idea property values are dropping another year and we won't even get $8 million for it? I pushed the door open and saw Grandpa in his wheelchair, perfectly calm. My mom stood in front of him, her makeup smudged around the edges, clutching that same manila envelope I'd seen before, now torn open at the corner. Grandpa. I ran over and planted myself between them. My mom looked at me, riled for half a second, then let out a cold laugh. Good. You're here. Mandy, come over here and sign this. She pulled a sheet of paper out of her bag and slapped it onto the marbly coffee table. I talked to a lawyer. The trust is complicated, but if Grandpa signs a revocation and you voluntarily waive your inheritance, the appointment can be transferred to your father's name. I read at the paper. Didn't move. Mom. No. Excuse me, I said no. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. Grandpa said the appointment is mine. I'm not signing anything. My mom read at me for 3 full seconds. Then she did something I never expected. She dropped to her knees on the marbly floor. Dad. Please. The TRS came out of nowhere, big, ugly sobs that splattered onto the polished stone. Kevin's company is falling apart. The bank calls every single day. If we don't get cash soon, we're going bankrupt. Please, just this once, help your son. Help your own family. The living room went silent. Mrs. Wang was hiding in the kitchen doorway, not daring to come out. Grandpa read down at my kneeling mother, his face shifting through half a dozen expressions I couldn't read. I stood there frozen. My legs felt like they were filled with concrete. My mom never cried. Not in front of me, anyway. She was always the strong one, the one who got things done. She went to parent-teacher conferences and argued with my teachers. She stood up for me when other parents made snide comments about my dad's failing business. She sat alone in the living room until dawn when my dad came home drunk at 3 in the morning. And now she was on her knees, begging my grandfather for the appointment. Mom, my voice cracked. Mandy, don't say anything. She looked up at me, face streaked with TRS and mascara. You don't know how hard this family has struggled. Last month your dad couldn't even pay his workers. They were going to riot at the factory. You think I wanted to come here begging? I had no choice. Grandpa slowly raised his hand and pointed at the water glass on the table. Drink some water, he said. My mom blinked. Cry all you want, Grandpa went on, his voice flat. Then drink some water and try again. Doesn't matter how long you kneel. The appointment belongs to my granddaughter. If you need money, go earn it. Don't come after a child. My mom stood up. Her TRS were still wet on her cheeks, but that fire came roaring back into her eyes. She grabbed the paper off the coffee table and tore it into confetti. Fine. If that's how you want to play it, don't blame me. She walked toward the door, stopped with her hand on the frame, and looked back at me over her shoulder. It was a brief look. But there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Something cold. Mandy. You better not regret this. The door slammed. I stood there shaking. Grandpa reached out and patted my hand. She won't do anything. Don't worry. But I knew she would. That afternoon, Mrs. Wang got a call from the pharmacy. All the existing orders had been cancelled. A new order would take at least 5 days to process. Grandpa's blood pressure medication, 1 pill left. Enough for tomorrow. I didn't tell Grandpa. I called the elder rights lawyer Ryan had recommended, and he said we could file a police report, but we'd need proof of malicious intent. Proof. I scrolled through my mom's WeChat moments, her texts, her call logs, nothing. She was too smart to leave a trail. That night, I sat alone on the balcony, opened grandmother's tin box, and dug all the way to the bottom. My fingers found something I had missed before. A key. Small and brass, with a faded yellow label stuck to it. The label read, in handwriting I didn't recognize, Old House, Renmin Road. I froze. Grandpa had never once mentioned an old house. I only knew about the tiny place in that photograph, the one where he and grandmother stood smiling like fools. I'd assumed they'd sold it years ago, when they moved into the penthouse. I turned the key over. On the back of the label, in Grandpa's unmistakable scrawl, were 5 words. Your grandmother hid this. I held that brass key all night long. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I texted Sophie, asking if she knew where Renmin Road was. She fired back a string of voice messages, basically saying that whole district had been torn down years ago. Why your grandpa owns property over there. I didn't tell her about the key. Some things, you keep to yourself until you know what they mean. The next morning, after Mrs. Wang gave Grandpa his last pill, I told them I was going out for breakfast. I took a cab straight to the old party of town. Renmin Road was a different world from downtown. Narrow alleys, old plane trees that knitted their branches together overhead and blotted out most of the sky. Many of the buildings had already been demolished, their lots surrounded by blue corrugated iron fences spray-painted with the words condemned in white. I followed the address on the label, expecting to find a pile of rubble. Instead, at the very end of the alley, around a sharp corner, the house was still standing. Gray brick walls. Red tile roof. Moss creeping up the front steps. It looked exactly like the photograph. I stood at the wooden door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The brass key slid into the lock. I closed my eyes for a second, then turned it till the door swung open. It wasn't big inside. A living room. A kitchen. 2 bedrooms. All the furniture was draped in white sheets, but the air didn't smell musty. There was a faint scent of camphor wood, like someone had been coming by regularly to air the place out. I lifted the sheet off the sofa in the living room. Beneath it was a rattan armchair, exactly like the one in Grandpa's old photographs. A chipped enamel mug sat on the side table, a dried ring of tea stains at the bottom. I walked into the bedroom. On the wall hung a piece of calligraphy on rice paper. For characters, Harmony brings prosperity. The signature was my grandfather's. Dated 35 years ago. In the bedside table drawer, I found a file folder. My hands sta root shaking the moment I opened it. It wasn't a property deed, it was a stock subscription agreement. 30 years ago, my grandfather had taken the relocation compensation from this very house and invested it in the original Shaw residential of a tech company. The name of that company, I recognized it. It was the developer that had built the CBD tower downtown, the one I could see from Grandpa's floor-to-ceiling windows. The agreement stated clearly, dividends from these original Shaw residential were automatically transferred each year into a designated account. The beneficiary of that account. Mandy. The establishment date was the year I was born. I closed the folder, slid down against the bedside table, and sat on the floor. My head was ringing. Grandpa had been setting this up since the day I came into the world. The penthouse apartment was just the tip of the iceberg. The real wealth was here, in this little house, hidden by grandmother all those years ago, guarded by grandfather ever since. I pulled out my phone to call him. My thumb hovered over the dial button. Then I stopped. Yesterday, when Grandpa said the apartment goes to Mandy, his face had been too calm. If he'd been preparing all of this for 18 years, why didn't he tell me about the account? Why let me stumble onto it myself unless he wanted me to find it? The doorbell rang. I nearly threw my phone across the room. Who else knew about this place besides me and Grandpa? I crept to the door and peeked through the crack. A man in a black suit stood outside, holding a briefcase, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, and I recognized his face instantly. Grandpa's lawyer. I'd seen his signature on the trust documents. I pulled the door open. Miss Chin. The lawyer smiled and adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses. Your grandfather said you'd find your way here within 3 days. I've been waiting. I let him inside. He glanced at the sheet-covered furniture, didn't sit, and walked over to the window to pull the curtain aside a few inches. Your grandfather asked me to give you something, he said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out another envelope. He said once you found this place, I should hand it over. I opened it. Inside was a bank card and a handwritten note. Grandpa's handwriting, the pin is your birthday. There's enough in this account to get you through college. Don't tell your parents. If you run out, let me know. I clutched that bank card and felt TRS splashing onto the note. Your grandfather sta root preparing this right after his stroke 3 years ago, the lawyer said quietly, leaning against the window frame. He said he didn't know how much longer he had, but he needed to make sure you had an escape route. The penthouse was the decoy, the thing your parents would fight over. The real inheritance was always in that account. It all clicked into place. Grandpa had set up that trust on purpose. The appointment was a target. He'd deliberately shown the deed, deliberately handed it to me in front of my parents. He knew they'd fight. They'd scheme. They'd pour all their energy into that penthouse. And while they were busy fighting over the decoy, they'd never noticed that the real prize was somewhere else entirely. He even kept it from me. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. He kept it from everyone. The lawyer smiled faintly. When he set up the trust, he didn't disclose this asset at all. He was worried someone might trace it before you turned 18. Once you were an adult, he told me to give you this. I looked at that bank card in my palm. Such a thin sliver of plastic. But it felt heavy as iron. What about now? A sudden panic hit me. His medicine, it's almost gone. The lawyer's expression shifted. Mrs. Wang told me, he said, lowering the curtain. I've already contacted another pharmacy. They'll deliver this afternoon. As for your mother, I'm sending her a formal legal warning. If she interferes with his medical care again, we'll pursue charges. I let out a long breath. But then a darker thought surfaced. I looked at Grandpa's note again, remembering the flatness in his voice yesterday when he told my mom the appointment wasn't hers. Mr. Chen, I said slowly, my grandfather's health. Tell me the truth. The lawyer was quiet for a long moment. He's been in recovery since the stroke. Rehab, physical therapy, the whole program. But at his age, progress is slow. These past 6 months, he's brought up asset distribution with me more than once. He said, it's about time. About time. Those 2 words hit me like a punch to the chest. I bolted for the door. Miss Chin, I have to see him. I ran out of that old house, down the alley, and flagged down a cab. The driver asked where to, and I gave him Grandpa's address. I couldn't stop crying. My phone buzzed. Sophie, just saw your mom at the mall. She was with some guy in a suit, looking at documents. Heads up. I turned my phone off and shoved it in my pocket. My mom was still scheming. She had no idea Grandpa had already moved the real treasure out of her reach. She was still circling that appointment like a shark. Once that legal warning hit her desk, she'd only get crazier. But I didn't see about her right now. I just needed to get back to my grandfather. The cab pulled up to the building, and I saw Ryan parked at the curb. He was sitting in the driver's seat, scrolling through his phone. When he saw me running toward the entrance, he rolled down the window. Your mom showed up, liar. Your grandpa had security turn her away at the lobby. She left looking pretty upset. I figured I'd stick around in case she came back. Is my grandpa okay? He's upstairs. Mrs. Wang is with him. I sprinted for the elevator, jabbing the close button. Ryan caught up and stepped in beside me, pressing a hand over mine to stop my frantic stabbing. Breathe. He's fine. But there's something I need to tell you first. Something in his face made my stomach drop. Your mother may already know about the stock account. I read at him. She hired a private investigator to trace your grandfather's assets. Route last week. She came here today to confront him about it. She's got a copy of that subscription agreement. My brain scrambled to catch up. How did she get a copy? The agreement was in that old house, in a drawer only I and the lawyer knew about. Unless she'd followed me. A cold wave washed over me from head to toe. When I'd gone to Rinman Road this morning, I hadn't checked my REA review mirror once. If my mom had been watching me since yesterday, since I left to see Ryan, she'd known everything. The elevator chimed. I pushed through the door and saw Grandpa in his wheelchair, still facing the floor-to-ceiling windows. He heard me come in and slowly turned around. You found it. I walked over and knelt down in front of him. Grandpa. Why didn't you tell me? If I'd told you, would you have searched for it so carefully? He smiled a little. Mandy, some things you have to discover on your own. If I'd laid everything out in front of you, you'd never know how it got there. But you, don't worry about me. He reached out and touched my hair. I've lived long enough. Your grandmother's been gone 10 years. I've had 10 extra years I didn't count on. That's more than enough. The TRS came again. Don't cry, he said. Go get that folder on the coffee table. I stood up and saw a brand new file folder sitting on the marbly table, sealed with a strip of tape that read, "For Mandy's eyes only." I opened it. Inside was a revised trust addendum. This document removes you as the sole beneficiary of the Penthouse. I looked up Shaw RPLY. Don't panic, Grandpa waved his hand. The APA goes to your parents now. Let them fight over it. But, houses and money. They're just things. He turned back to the window. Your mother tried to sta review of medicine for that APA. Your father abandoned me for 3 years for that APA. Now they can have it. Let's see how they split it. And then I understood. The Penthouse for them. The Shaw res for me. Once they got the APA, they'd tear each other apart, fighting over what to do with it. Dad would want to sell. Mom would want to live in it. They'd argue and scheme and backstab until that APA became a wedge between them. They'd be so consumed by their own war that they'd never come after me. Never dig deeper. Never find out about the account. Grandpa had used one APA to pull them off my trail. Mandy, he said, reaching for my hand. His fingers were thin and like autumn wind. Before your grandmother passed, she told me, don't let the kids grow up in money. I'm passing that to you now. Money doesn't matter. What matters is remembering who you are. I gripped his hand and nodded. That afternoon, the new medicine arrived. Mrs. Wang brought hot water, and I helped Grandpa take his dose. Sunlight streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the fine lines on his face, reflecting off that abstract painting I still couldn't figure out. Ryan waited in the living room until he was sure everything was stable, then slipped out. Before he left, he sent me a text. I've looped in the elder rights lawyer. If your mom makes another move, someone will step in. Focus on your grandpa for now. I put my phone on silent. That night, my mom didn't call. My dad didn't show up. The whole penthouse was quiet except for Grandpa's occasional cough and the soft sounds of Mrs. Wang washing dishes in the kitchen. I sat by Grandpa's bed, holding Grandmother's old hairbrush, brushing his hair slowly. His hair was soft and thin, the brush just glided over his scalp. He had his eyes closed, and his breathing was steady. Mandy. Mem, what do you want to do with your life? I thought about it. Before, I'd never really considered the question. My parents had already drawn the map for me: finance major, bank job, ma ROI, someone with a good family background, settle down. But those were their plans. I want to be a kindergarten teacher, I said. Grandpa opened one eye. Why? Because I like kids. And, I smiled, kindergarten teachers don't need to buy houses or cars. I'll make enough to get by. The money you left me, I'll just keep it. Maybe buy books for the kids someday. Grandpa looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. Really smiled, the way he used to in that faded photograph with grandmother. Good, he said. Be a kindergarten teacher. He closed his eyes again. His breathing grew slower, deeper. I sat there, tucking his blanket in, watching the city lights flicker outside the window, one by one. The next morning, I woke up on the living room sofa. Someone had draped a blanket over me. Mrs. Wine was in the kitchen with a tray of warm soy milk. The old man's still sleeping, she whispered. He had a good night. I nodded and carried my soy milk out to the balcony. Morning wind, CL, and fresh. Below, the city was already jammed with traffic. I pulled up my phone and saw a text from my mom, sent at 3 a.m. We'll talk about the appointment later. Just focus on school. Below it, my dad had sent one too. Mandy, don't take your mother's words to heart. Come home for dinner this weekend. I didn't reply. But I screenshotted both messages and saved them in a new album on my phone. I named the album For Later. Back inside, I opened grandmother's tin box and placed the bank card and stock agreement inside. Then I took out that brass key and held it in my palm. I wasn't going to let the old house get demolished. I'd buy it back. With my own money. Grandpa's bedroom door cracked open. I heard him talking to Mrs. Wang inside. His voice was soft, but stronger than yesterday. Where's Mandy? On the balcony. Tell her to come eat. I wiped my eyes one last time, tucked the tin box back under my pillow, and pushed the door open. Sunlight was pouring through the windows. That penthouse was worth $10 million Rs. But what Grandpa left me was worth so much more. And, Sparkles, if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe, favorite, and leave a review. Your support means the world to me and keeps me writing. Mandy and Grandpa's story doesn't end here. There's so much more to come, how she fights to save the old house, how she navigates her parents' schemes, and how she finally becomes that kindergarten teacher. Every follow, every comment, I read all of them and they make my day. Thank you for reading. 2 hearts.